Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to ask Mr. Magness a few questions. Being a congressman from Texas, I represent the 36th district in southeast Texas, and 63% of our power is coming from coal-fired plants. So we have a great interest in the Clean Power Plan. But how will the Clean Power Plan affect average electricity consumers in our state? Mr. Magness.
Mr. Babin, I'd say in two ways based on our studies. One is our study found that the cost of energy we would expect to increase by up to 16% going out into the implementation period. So just on that basis alone, you'd see that sort of increase. Yeah. Then in addition, for example, in Texas, we recently spent $6.9 billion investing in new transmission, primarily to bring renewable energy that's in the rural west part of Texas into the cities and into East Texas. So those costs all have to be recovered from end user customers as well. When we have to buy reliability services that are not just the energy coming out of the plant, but something in addition to keep the system stable, those costs will increase as we have to face that situation more. Okay. So all of those costs in our market ultimately roll down to the end user consumer.
I got you. Okay, and then second, Texas leads the nation in wind power, but EPA projects in Building Block 3 of the final rule that over 100 terawatt hours of renewable generation will be added in ERCOT by 2030, in addition to what exists today. Given ERCOT's experience with integrating renewables, is that a realistic estimate?
Well, it's an enormous increase in what we're seeing. We currently, in 2014, saw 36 terawatt hours on our system, and this is setting wind penetration records for the nation frequently. Right. So the idea of taking that up to 100 is an enormous reach to add to a system that's already doing a whole lot with renewables.
Okay. And then the Clean Power Plan is just one part of the EPA's regulatory onslaught against Texas and other states. The EPA looks at the rule in isolation, but does Texas face a cumulative impact from this and other recent EPA rules?
Yes, and the one I would cite to you most specifically is there's a regional haze program that EPA manages. We're facing a federal implementation plan on the regional haze rules that could drive out coal-fired units much more quickly than the Clean Power Plan. So we may be seeing, but part of the, as you mentioned, the cumulative impact is if you might make the investment as a unit owner to comply with regional haze, you might not make that investment as you look over the horizon. Certainly. There's an increasing number of investments that would be required, and it may make it a harder decision to keep those units available while we're building the transmission and taking the other steps we need to meet the time when they're gone.
Okay. EPA says compliance with the Clean Power Plan will not start until 2022, but could Texas start seeing the impacts much sooner than that, especially when taking into account other EPA regulations?
I think for the reason we were discussing just a moment ago, that you see sort of the cumulative impact of these rules, and people are going to have to make very large, important investment decisions right. In the near term, and all they can see over the horizon is difficulties in the long term.
Last question. ERCOT's analysis of the impacts of the Clean Power Plan state that though EPA made a number of modifications in the final rule, the most impactful for the stringency of the limits for Texas is EPA's shift to a uniform national approach for setting the standards in the final rule rather than the state-by-state approach used in the proposal, as EPA provided state regulators with a significant degree of flexibility in determining how to comply with the Clean Power Plan, and why is a uniform approach a particular concern to Texas?
Well, I think that part of the issue here is the understanding the ERCOT interconnection, which is a sort of a separate grid from the eastern and western interconnection. So our ability to participate in regional approaches is more complicated, I think, than a lot of other areas, and produces a challenge for Texas that may not exist in other states and other regions. So that certainly ups the ante on the difficulty of taking that kind of approach. So while there were some differences in that national approach that affected, what we're seeing in the study, we think trying to manage it in the way they're contemplating is difficult, particularly when we've seen our market, as it works, is generating a lot of the outcomes they're already looking for.
Right.
To change it doesn't make a lot of sense as far as trying to get to the same objectives.
Anyway, thank you, Mr. Magness, and I'd also like to thank all the other witnesses. We appreciate you coming today, and without, I'll reel back the balance of my time, which is 0.
Thank you, Mr. Babin, and